I thought he'd fight for me after I got pregnant with his brother's child. He left without a word and never looked back. I told the man I loved that I was pregnant with his brother's baby and I expected him to fight for me. I need you to sit with that sentence for a second. Read it again. Let the delusion sink in. Because I lived inside that delusion for months, and the fact that I'm able to type it now with my hands shaking and my chest tight means I've finally crawled far enough out of it to see it for what it was, the single most entitled, self-absorbed, deranged expectation a woman has ever carried into the worst conversation of her life. I told him. I sat across from him at our kitchen table, in the apartment he paid for, and I said the words. And I watched his face go still. Not angry. Not broken. Still. Like a lake that just froze over. He looked at me for what felt like a full minute. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask questions. He didn't cry. He stood up. He picked up his keys. He walked to the door. He opened it. And he left. No words. No slam. No backwards glance. He walked out of our apartment and out of my life with the quiet finality of a man who had just decided, in real time, that I no longer existed. That was 14 months ago. He has not spoken to me since. Not a text. Not a voicemail. Not a message through a friend. Nothing. Total, permanent, absolute silence. And I deserve every second of it. But God, it's loud. His name was Elijah. I'm going to use his real name because he deserves to be real in this story, not a placeholder. Elijah Davis. 32 when I destroyed him. We'd been together for 4 years. Lived together for 2. He was an architect. Not the flashy kind. The quiet kind. The kind who drew buildings that were functional and beautiful and modest, the kind of buildings that don't win awards but that people actually want to live in. That's who he was in everything. Functional. Beautiful in a quiet way. Modest to a fault. He didn't take up space in rooms. He didn't need to be the loudest or the funniest or the most impressive. He was just steady. Present. The kind of man who remembered your dentist appointment and had soup ready when you got home because he knew you'd be hungry and too numb to cook. The kind of man who fixed the leaky faucet before you mentioned it because he noticed. He noticed everything. Except what I was doing behind his back. Or maybe he noticed that too and just loved me enough to believe it wasn't what it looked like. I'll never know. Because he never gave me the chance to ask. I need to tell you about myself before Elijah, because the woman I was when I met him is the key to understanding how I became the woman who destroyed him. My name is Danielle. I'm 29. I grew up in a household where love was conditional and attention was currency. My mother performed affection based on what you could give her. My father was present but disengaged, the kind of man who sat in the same room as his family but lived on a different planet. I learned early that love wasn't something you received for being yourself. It was something you earned by being needed. And I carried that into every relationship I ever had. I needed to be needed. I needed to be the center. I needed to be the thing someone couldn't live without. And when I wasn't, when the attention dipped or the intensity faded or the relationship settled into something stable and quiet and ordinary, I panicked. Not visibly. Internally. A slow, creeping panic that said, if he's not chasing you, he's losing interest. If he's comfortable, he's bored. If the love is calm, it's dying. I know now that this is a distortion. Calm love isn't dying love. Calm love is the kind that lasts. But I didn't know that then. And by the time I learned it, Elijah was gone. His brother's name was Marcus. 2 years older. Different in every way that mattered. Where Elijah was quiet, Marcus was magnetic. Where Elijah observed, Marcus performed. Marcus walked into rooms and rearranged the energy. He was charming in the way that men are charming when they've spent their whole lives practicing it on everyone they meet. He flirted with waitresses. He complimented strangers. He made you feel like the most important person in the room, and then, the moment you looked away, he made the next person feel the same thing. He was a salesman. Not professionally. Ontologically. His entire existence was a pitch, and every person he met was a potential close. I saw all of this. I catalogued it. I knew, intellectually, that Marcus was the kind of man women should run from. And I walked straight toward him anyway. Because Marcus made me feel the thing Elijah had stopped making me feel, desperate. Not desperate in the negative sense. In the addictive sense. The sense where every interaction is heightened, every text is a hit, every glance is a confirmation that you are wanted with an intensity that borders on obsession. Marcus didn't love me. I know that now. He wanted what his brother had. That was the engine. Not desire for me. Desire for what belonged to Elijah. And I was too hungry for the feeling to see the difference. The affair started 8 months before the pregnancy. It started with texts. Marcus would message me things that were just slightly over the line. Compliments that lingered. Jokes that had an edge. Eli's lucky. If he ever slips up, I'm right here, he said it with a laughing emoji. I should have screenshot it and shown Elijah. I should have set a boundary so firm it left a mark. Instead, I laughed back. I sent a blushing emoji. I left the door open. And Marcus, who had spent his entire life walking through doors that weren't meant for him, walked right in. The texts became calls. The calls became meetings. Coffee. Then lunch. Then drives that went nowhere and lasted too long. I told Elijah I was with friends. I told him I was at yoga. I told him I was running errands. And he believed me because he trusted me and because the man I was lying to was his own brother, the one person he would never suspect, because who suspects their own blood? The lies came easily. That's the thing nobody warns you about. The first lie is hard. The 10th lie is muscle memory. By the 20th, you're not even lying anymore. You're just narrating an alternate reality with the fluency of someone who lives there full time. The physical affair started on a Thursday. At Marcus's apartment. I drove there after telling Elijah I was going to a coworker's birthday dinner. I parked 2 blocks away like a criminal. I walked into Marcus's building and I felt something I'm ashamed to describe but need to be honest about: alive. I felt alive. Not because Marcus was better than Elijah. He wasn't. In every measurable way, in kindness, in depth, in loyalty, in the ability to love without conditions, Elijah was the better man. But Elijah's love was calm. And Marcus's attention was chaos. And I was addicted to chaos because calm felt like being forgotten and chaos felt like being chosen. I know how stupid that sounds. I know. But if you've never been wired this way, if you've never felt the specific panic of being loved steadily and interpreting it as being loved less, then you won't fully understand the sickness that drove me into his brother's bed. It's not an excuse. There is no excuse. It's an explanation. And the explanation is this: I was broken in a way I didn't know, and instead of fixing myself, I broke everything around me. The affair went on for 8 months. 8 months of sneaking. 8 months of lies. 8 months of sitting across from Elijah at dinner, smiling, kissing him goodnight, sleeping next to him, and knowing that hours earlier I had been in his brother's apartment doing things that would end our relationship if he ever found out. I compartmentalized it so completely that I sometimes forgot it was happening. That's not a metaphor. There were moments, real moments, where Elijah and I would be walking through a park or cooking together or lying on the couch, and I would feel genuine love for him, genuine gratitude, genuine comfort, and the affair would feel like something that existed in another dimension. A separate Danielle who did separate things. The real Danielle loved Elijah. The other one was just meeting a need. That's the lie I told myself. That the affair was a supplement, not a replacement. That it didn't diminish what I had with Elijah because it existed in a different category. As though betrayal has categories. As though love has footnotes. The pregnancy happened because I was careless. That's the blunt truth. I was on birth control but I'd missed pills. Not intentionally. I'd gotten sloppy because the double life was exhausting and I was cutting corners everywhere. When the test came back positive, my first reaction was denial. Not denial of the pregnancy. Denial of the paternity. I told myself it could be Elijah's. I told myself the timing worked. I did the math obsessively, counting days, Googling conception windows, trying to construct a reality where this baby was my boyfriend's and everything could continue as it was. But the math didn't lie. The timing pointed to Marcus. Not definitively. But probably. Likely. Almost certainly. And I knew. In my gut, the same gut that had been screaming at me for 8 months to stop what I was doing, I knew. I should have gone to a clinic. I should have made a decision privately and carried the weight myself. I should have told Marcus and let him panic and then dealt with the fallout between the two of us without involving Elijah. There were a dozen paths I could have taken that would have caused less destruction. I took none of them. Because somewhere in my broken wiring, in the part of me that believed I was the protagonist of every story and that love was something tested by fire, I convinced myself that telling Elijah was the right thing to do. The honest thing. The thing that would prove I respected him enough to give him the truth. As though there's anything respectful about telling a man that you're carrying his brother's child. As though honesty, deployed as a grenade, is somehow noble. But here's the part I can barely admit, the part that makes me sick to type, the part that reveals the depth of my delusion. I thought he'd stay. Not just stay. Fight. I thought Elijah would hear the worst news of his life and respond by choosing me. By saying, "We'll figure this out." By crying and yelling and breaking things and then pulling me into his arms and saying, "I'm not letting you go." Because that's what love does in the movies, in the songs, in the stories I've been telling myself since I was 16 years old. Love fights. Love conquers. Love looks at betrayal and says, "I'm still here." I believe that. I actually believed that if the love was real, it would survive anything. Even this. Even an 8-month affair with his brother. Even a pregnancy. Even the complete and total annihilation of his trust. I thought his love for me was big enough to absorb the bomb I was about to drop. It wasn't. The conversation happened on a Tuesday evening. January. Cold outside. Warm inside. Elijah had just gotten home from work. He was making pasta. He always made pasta on Tuesdays. He had a routine, and the routine was so steady, so reliable, so Elijah, that I sometimes forgot it was a person making those choices and not a machine. He was chopping garlic when I sat down at the table. He said, "You okay? You look pale." I said, "I need to tell you something." He put the knife down. He wiped his hands. He sat across from me. He gave me his full attention. His full, undivided, trusting attention. The last time he would ever look at me like I was someone worth looking at. I said, "I'm pregnant." His face lit up. For about 2 seconds, his face lit up with the purest, most unguarded joy I've ever seen on a human being. He was already standing. He was already moving toward me. He was already reaching out to hold me. And then I kept talking. Because I couldn't let him hold me with a lie between us. Or because I'm self-destructive. Or because some part of me wanted to see the light leave his eyes. I don't know anymore. I said, "It might not be yours." He stopped. Mid-step. His hands dropped. I said, "I've been with someone else." The light didn't leave his eyes. It was extinguished. Like a candle in a closed fist. He said, "Who?" One word. I said, "Marcus." He didn't sit back down. He stood in the kitchen, perfectly still, and something happened to his face that I can only describe as a system shutting down. It wasn't anger. It wasn't grief. It was departure. He left his own face. Whatever lived behind his eyes, that was Elijah, that loved me, that trusted me, that made pasta on Tuesdays and remembered my dentist appointments, that thing left. Walked out of his own body before his body walked out of the apartment. He was gone before he was gone. He picked up his keys. He walked to the door. I said, "Elijah, please. Please say something. Yell at me. Hit the wall. Tell me you hate me. Anything." He didn't turn around. He didn't pause. He opened the door. He stepped through it. The door closed. And the silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever experienced. I called him. 23 times that night. Voicemail. Everyone. I texted him paragraphs. Read receipts off. I called Marcus. Marcus didn't answer either. I sat on the kitchen floor, next to the cutting board with the chopped garlic, next to the pot of water that was still on the stove, and I cried until I couldn't breathe. Not because I was sorry. Not yet. Because I was terrified. Because for the first time in my life, I had pushed someone to the edge and they hadn't pushed back. They just left. And I didn't know what to do with that. I'd been raised to believe that love was a fight. That if someone really loved you, they'd scream and cry and threaten and ultimately stay. Elijah didn't do any of that. He just disappeared. And his disappearance was more violent than any scream I've ever heard. He came back the next day while I was at work. I know because things were missing. His clothes. His laptop. His books. The photo of his mother on the hallway table. The small things that made the apartment his. Gone. Surgically removed. Like a doctor excising a tumor. He left everything that was ours. The couch. The dishes. The art we'd bought together. He only took what was his. Clean. Precise. Final. No note. No forwarding address. Nothing. I never saw him again. Marcus disappeared the same week. Not as completely as Elijah. Marcus didn't have the discipline for a clean exit. He just went quiet. Stopped answering calls. Stopped responding to texts. Changed his social media to private. A mutual friend told me, about 3 weeks after the implosion, that Marcus had moved. Different city. New job. No forwarding information. He'd been talking to a woman he'd met online. Already. 3 weeks. The man who had whispered "I'd leave everything for you" while lying in his brother's shadow was already whispering it to someone else. I want to sit with that for a moment because it's the part that should have shattered whatever was left of the delusion. Marcus didn't love me. He never loved me. I was not a person to him. I was a conquest. A territory that belonged to his brother, claimed and occupied and then abandoned the second the cost of holding it became real. Every text, every lingering compliment, every "if he ever slips up I'm right here" was a performance calibrated to make me feel special while serving his ego. He didn't want me. He wanted to be the brother who could take what Elijah had. And once the taking was done and the consequences arrived, he vanished. Like smoke. Like he'd never been real. And in a way, he hadn't been. The Marcus I'd built in my head, the one who saw me in ways Elijah couldn't, who understood me on some deeper frequency, that Marcus was a fiction I co-wrote because the alternative, that I threw away, the best man I'd ever known for a con artist with a charming smile, was too pathetic to face. I faced it anyway. Eventually. Alone. In the apartment that still smelled like Elijah's cologne for the first 2 weeks because I couldn't bring myself to open the windows. The pregnancy. I need to talk about the pregnancy because it's the thing that made everything irreversible and the thing that forced me to stop running from what I'd done. I kept the baby. I want to be clear about the decision-making process because people will judge it and they're allowed to. I considered every option. I considered termination. I considered adoption. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the clinic for 45 minutes and couldn't get out. Not because of moral conviction. Because of paralysis. Because every choice I'd made in the last year had been the wrong one, and I no longer trusted myself to make any choice at all. I called my mother. She said, "Keep it. A baby is a blessing." She said this without knowing the full story. When I told her the full story, the affair, Marcus, Elijah leaving, she went quiet and then said, "Well, you made your bed." She wasn't wrong. I had the baby. A boy. Born in September. Healthy. Beautiful in the way that all newborns are beautiful, wrinkled and screaming and completely unaware of the wreckage he was born into. I named him Owen. He has Marcus's eyes. I know this because I spent the first 3 months of his life staring at his face, looking for Elijah, hoping for some biological miracle that would rewrite the math, and finding Marcus instead. Every time. In the shape of his eyes. In the curve of his brow. In features that would sharpen as he grew and look more and more like the man who couldn't even be bothered to answer a phone call when the test came back positive. Marcus knows about Owen. I told him through a certified letter because he wouldn't answer any other form of communication. His response came through a lawyer. A paternity acknowledgement form. He signed it. He agreed to the minimum child support mandated by the state. He did not request visitation. He did not ask for photos. He did not ask Owen's name. He signed a check and a document, and that was the full extent of his involvement in the life of a child he helped create. I hold that document sometimes and I think about the man Elijah was. The man who would have been on the floor of the delivery room, holding my hand, cutting the cord, crying. The man who would have made pasta while the baby slept and stayed up all night during fevers and kept a baby book with dated photos on every page. The man who would have been the best father any child could ask for. That man is gone. Because of me. And in his place is a legal document from a stranger who couldn't even be bothered to ask what I named his son. I moved in with my mother. I was 28 years old, unemployed, pregnant, and then 29 years old with a newborn, living in my childhood bedroom, which still had the same carpet and the same window and the same crack in the ceiling I used to stare at when I was 16 and dreaming about a love that would consume me. I got consumed. Just not the way I imagined. My friends. Let me tell you about my friends. Because every story like this has a circle and every circle reveals itself when the crisis hits. I had a group of 4 women I'd been close to since college. When the affair was happening, 2 of them knew. They didn't just know. They enabled. They covered for me. They let me use their names as alibis. They said things like, "You deserve to feel alive and Elijah is great but he doesn't give you butterflies and sometimes you have to follow your heart." Follow your heart. As though the heart knows anything. As though the heart is anything other than a muscle that pumps blood and, when left unsupervised, pumps you straight into the worst decision of your life. These women cheered me into the affair the way fans cheer a car heading toward a wall. And when the crash came, when Elijah left and Marcus vanished and I was pregnant and alone, those same women went quiet. One by one. The first said she needed space from negative energy. The second said she was processing things differently now. The third just stopped answering. The fourth, the only one who hadn't known about the affair, called me and said, "I can't believe you did this. Elijah was the best thing that ever happened to you." She was right. She was the only one who was right about anything. And she was also the one I'd excluded from the secret because I knew, even then, that she'd tell me the truth. And the truth was the one thing I couldn't afford. Elijah. Let me tell you what I know about Elijah. Almost nothing. That's the answer. He disappeared from my life so completely that the absence has its own weather. I know he's alive because a mutual friend confirmed it once, reluctantly, after I begged. I know he moved. I don't know where. I know he left the architecture firm he'd been with. I don't know where he went. I know he changed his phone number because mine goes straight to a deadline. I know he deactivated every social media account. I know he told his parents what happened because his mother, a woman named Gloria who had treated me like a daughter for 4 years, called me once, about 2 months after the breakup, and said, in a voice that was controlled and devastated in equal measure, "Danielle, I have nothing to say to you except that you broke my son." Both of my sons, actually. But only one of them deserved to be broken. And it wasn't Elijah. She hung up. I never heard from her again. The silence. I need to talk about the silence because it's the thing I think about most and understand least. I wanted him to fight. I've said that. I wanted the screaming match. The plate thrown against the wall. The how could you delivered at full volume. I wanted the dramatic rupture that all my favorite movies and songs promised was the precursor to either a breakup or a reconciliation. I was prepared for both. I had speeches for both. If he screamed, I'd scream back, and eventually we'd collapse into each other, and it would be messy but real. If he left in anger, I'd wait. I'd give him time. I'd write letters. I'd show up at his door with tears and promises and the weight of a genuine apology, and eventually, he'd open the door. He didn't scream. He didn't slam. He didn't fight. He gave me silence. And silence, I've learned, is the one response you can't counter. You can't argue with it. You can't match its intensity. You can't meet it halfway. Silence isn't the absence of communication. It's the most complete communication there is. It says, you are not worth the energy of a response. You are not worth the breath it would take to say goodbye. You are not worth the weight of my anger. You have been downgraded from someone I love to someone who does not exist. And that, more than any words, more than any confrontation, more than any dramatic scene, is the thing that destroyed me. Not because it was cruel. Because it was accurate. I didn't deserve a fight. I didn't deserve his anger. I didn't deserve the emotional labor of his grief. I deserved exactly what I got, a door closing and a man walking away and a silence that will last for the rest of my life. Owen is 5 months old. He's starting to smile. He's starting to reach for things. He's starting to look at me with that pure, unfiltered infant trust that makes your chest crack open because you know you don't deserve it but you need it so badly you could die. I love him. I love him with a ferocity that terrifies me because it's the first love I've ever felt that isn't about me. It isn't about being needed or being chosen or being the center. It's about him. His face. His hands. His sounds. His future. I love him the way I should have loved Elijah, without conditions, without performance, without the constant, gnawing need to be reassured that the love was still there. I've thought about reaching out to Elijah. 100 times. 1,000. I've drafted emails I'll never send. I've written letters I'll never mail. I've stood in the parking lot of the apartment building where we used to live and stared up at the window of the kitchen where he was chopping garlic when I ended his world, and I've imagined knocking on the door and finding him there, making pasta on a Tuesday and saying, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You deserved better. You deserved someone who could recognize that calm love is the best love, that steady hands are the strongest hands, that a man who remembers your dentist appointment and makes you soup is worth more than every butterfly in every stomach that has ever existed." I've imagined it. And then I get back in my car. Because he didn't ask for my apology. He didn't leave room for one. He sealed the exit behind him and walked away, and I am left on the side of the door with a baby in a Ziploc bag of regret and the permanent understanding that I had everything and I burned it for a feeling. I'm 29 years old. I live with my mother. I have a son who has his father's eyes and his uncle's absence and his mother's worst qualities waiting to surface if I'm not vigilant every single day. I have a job at a call center that pays just enough. I have a therapist who says I'm making progress, which I think means I've stopped crying during sessions. I have a life that is small and difficult and honestly mine for the first time, because there's nobody left to perform for. Elijah, if you ever read this, I know you won't. I know you've built a life that doesn't include me and never will. I know the silence is intentional and permanent, and I don't have the right to break it. But I need to say it anyway, into the void, because holding it is killing me. You were the best person I've ever known. Not the most exciting. Not the most intense. The best. The man who chopped garlic on Tuesdays and noticed the leaky faucet and remembered every small thing that mattered. The man who loved me calmly and steadily and without conditions, and who I mistook for boring because I was too broken to recognize that what I had was the thing most people spend their entire lives searching for. I had it. And I threw it away for chaos. And the chaos gave me nothing except a baby with another man's eyes and an apartment I can't afford and a silence so total that some nights I put my hand on the wall and press, just to feel something solid, because everything else has collapsed. You didn't fight for me. And you were right not to. Because I wasn't worth the fight. I know that now. I knew it then, somewhere underneath the delusion and the entitlement and the pathological need to be at the center of someone's storm. I knew it the moment I saw the light leave your eyes in the kitchen. I knew it when the door closed. I knew it every time I called and got voicemail. I knew it when your mother said you broke my son and hung up. I wasn't worth it. And the only thing worse than knowing that is knowing that you knew it first. You walked away without a word. And your silence said everything. I hear it every night. In the spaces between Owen's breathing. In the absence of pasta on Tuesdays. In the empty side of a bed that will never be filled by anyone who loves me the way you did. I hear it. And it sounds like a door clicking shut. Quiet. Final. The loudest sound in the world.